Okay, so now we're going to discuss theistic Platonism, natural law, and virtue theory. So we'll begin with theistic Platonism and natural law, which are two theistic theories of the good, and then we'll talk about the relevance of the virtues to our overall moral account. Last week, we explored a theory of the right, or moral obligations, namely divine command theory. So this week, what we're going to do is discuss two theistic theories of the good, or theories of moral values, and then we will look at moral virtues and how they fit into the overall moral picture. Concerning this question of goodness, if we confine divine command theory to an account of moral duties, we are still left with the question of how to think about moral goodness, this matter of moral values, and how might God be related to moral goodness. In fact, it's likely that one's theory of moral duties, or the right, in one sense or another, rests on one's theory of the good. So now we are approaching that prior question of how best to understand the issue of moral goodness. One account of goodness, which we describe in Chapter 5 of Good God, is a theistic Platonist approach. This theory identifies God himself with the ultimate good. I find this to be, at the very least, a most intriguing possibility. To find an example of someone who embraces such a position, consider these words from William Lane Craig. He says the reasoning at the heart of the moral argument goes all the way back to Plato, who argued that things have goodness insofar as they stand in some relation to the good, which subsists in itself as an idea, an abstract object endowed, however, with causal power to affect the world. As the ultimate reality, the good serves as a surrogate for God in Plato's metaphysical system. And now this is the important part. With the advent of Christian theism, Craig wrote, the good became identified by the church fathers with God himself. Along such lines, I wanted to share with you a brief quote from David Bentley Hart as well, who wrote, "Among the mind's transcendental aspirations, it is the longing for moral goodness that is probably the most difficult to contain within the confines of a naturalist metaphysics." And finally, Robert Adams, in his book Finite and Infinite Goods, insists that it's natural for a theist to take God as best filling the role played by the beautiful in Plato's Symposium or the good in Plato's Republic. Adams ends up endorsing this sort of theistic Platonic account according to which God is the ultimate good and other lesser goods are in Platonic fashion good insofar as they resemble the ultimate good in one sense or another. An identity or equation between God and the good likely means that it's no easy matter to say in short compass what goodness is. Since God remains forever beyond our full grasp, so would ultimate goodness, since an identity relation obtains between them. It also means that the ultimate good is not simply a state of affairs, but it's something profoundly personal. Here I could introduce to you a little bit of fancy terminology, if you'd like, the is of identity versus the is of predication. When we identify something, like God and the good, that's the is of identity. If I say simply that God is good, I'm predicating of God the property of being good, that's the is of predication. There's no real inconsistency, by the way, affirming both. God is good and God is the good ultimately. In fact, it makes perfect sense that the ultimate exemplar of the good would himself be perfectly good. Well, you'll have occasion to think more about that Platonic theistic approach, but for now let's move on to a second possibility of accounting for the good, natural law. This approach tends to broach the topic of what is good for human beings in light of their nature. It's more in the tradition of Aristotle than Plato. This approach raises numerous questions, among them this one: what are the basic goods for human nature? And what this suggests is that in order for us to answer that question, we have to have some insight into what human nature really is. Opinions can vary, of course, somewhat about what basic goods for human beings are, but typical goods include life and health, knowledge, beauty, friendship, and other social goods like being part of a family or community, fulfilling work and activity, including play, psychological goods such as inner peace or self-integration, practical reasonableness, and in some cases, religion. And again, whether you were to include that among the basic goods or not likely depends on how it is you understand the human condition. Interestingly enough now, Evans does not adopt a natural law approach to understanding moral obligations. Remember, he is a divine command theorist when it comes to moral obligations, but he does base his divine command theory on a natural law understanding of the good. All right, so he takes God and God's commands as authoritative for imposing obligations built on a natural law understanding of what's good for human beings. What are the possible principles that might imply that human beings have good reasons to obey God? Let's take a look at that question. So what are some of the possible principles that could connect God and authority when it comes to morality? Well, first, gratitude to God, right? The giver of every good gift should motivate us to recognize his authority and to obey him. 2, Aquinas held that God is the highest good for every person. And that would mean that the highest good for us is the beatific vision, and doing what is necessary to achieve such a relation makes the best possible sense. Number 3, God, by virtue of his creation of humans and the natural world, you might say has a rightful claim to be the owner of that created world and everything in it, including human beings. So if we are God's property, God has the right to establish rules for how human beings should conduct themselves. Evans' conclusion is that natural law and divine command theory are really not at odds at all, but rather that the former is a plausible foundation for a divine command theory of moral obligations. A really interesting question that arises at this juncture is integration possible between these two conceptions of the good? So you have the Platonic theistic account of the good, according to which God himself is the good. You have a natural law approach that focuses on those goods that comport with our nature. And you might ask, are these consistent or reconcilable? Are they able to be kind of integrated and synthesized? Well, I do indeed think that it may well be possible in certain ways to do so. What is best for us, after all, as human beings, is arguably God himself, who, according to the theistic Platonist, is the ultimate good in and of itself, or himself. Thus, we may well, in our own theistic ethical approaches, be able to incorporate aspects of both theories, the more Platonic approach and the more Aristotelian approach. Lastly, I want to talk about virtue theory. This is the theory according to which the formation of our moral characters, long-term dispositional states of character, is in many ways one of the most important points of the whole moral enterprise. Evans sees this theory as in tension with neither divine command theory nor natural law. He simply thinks that each theory does its own work, and it's different work. Divine command theory, an account of moral obligations. Natural law, an account of basic human goods. Virtue theory, an account of the traits of moral persons. And to drive home his point, Evans identifies several connections between divine command theory and virtue theory. Number one of our moral duties may well be to cultivate moral virtues. 2, it's arguable that the fundamental commands of God are indeed, at least in part, commands to acquire virtues. 3, an account of the virtues may be valuable in giving us an understanding of what motivates moral agents to live in accordance with their duties. 4, if divine command theory is right, then fulfilling our moral duties can be at the same time an expression of devotion to God, thus linking the life of duty to such theological virtues as hope and faith. Number 5, a passionate concern and desire to live in accordance with one's duties is itself recognized by most people as one of the virtues. And finally, 6, the ultimate goal of obeying our duties may be to train us to be the sort of people who eventually move beyond our duties to become virtuous and godly people.